Hello, great to see so many of you joining, already at 100, fantastic. Welcome to this webinar on midwifery regulation. It would be great if you start in the chat introducing yourself, where you're joining from today, so we can start to get to know each other.
Hi, everyone. We are going to start with the Zoom instructions. Next slide, please.
Welcome to your meeting with ICM. The interpretation button should appear at the bottom of your screen, next to the Share Screen button. By clicking on the interpretation button, you can choose the language you would like to hear. The interpretation button will then transform this meeting into the selected language. To change the language you would like to hear again, follow the previous procedure by clicking on that same button. By default, you will hear the selected language at 80% volume and the original audio at 20% volume. If you would like to mute or unmute the original audio, click on the corresponding option within the language button. Enjoy your meeting. Bienvenue à votre réunion avec l'ICM. Comme la réunion propose une interprétation simultanée en français, le bouton Interprétation devrait apparaître en bas de votre écran à côté du bouton Partager l'écran. En cliquant sur le bouton Interprétation, vous pouvez choisir la langue que vous souhaitez entendre. Le bouton Interprétation se transforme alors en la langue sélectionnée. Pour changer à nouveau la langue que vous souhaitez entendre, suivez la procédure précédente en cliquant sur le même bouton. Par défaut, vous entendrez la langue sélectionnée à 80% de volume et l'audio original à 20% de volume. Si vous souhaitez couper ou supprimer l'audio original, cliquez sur l'option correspondante dans le bouton de la langue. Bonne réunion. Bienvenido a su reunión de la ICM. Como la reunión ofrece interpretación simultánea en español, el botón Interpretación debería aparecer en la parte inferior de su pantalla, junto al botón Compartir pantalla. Haciendo clic en el botón Interpretación, puede elegir el idioma que desea escuchar. El botón Interpretación cambia entonces al idioma seleccionado. Para volver a cambiar el idioma que desea escuchar, siga el procedimiento anterior pulsando el mismo botón. Por defecto, oirás el idioma seleccionado a un 80% de volumen y el audio original a un 20%. Si quieres silenciar o desilenciar el audio original, haz clic en la opción correspondiente del botón de idioma. Disfruta de su reunión. Bienvenido.
Welcome, everyone. I'm Bruna, the event coordinator at ICM, and I'm here for technical support today. Feel free to introduce yourself and share your comments during the webinar by clicking in the chat. And if you have questions, please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, and we'll address the questions by the end of the webinar. Over to you, Steph.
Thank you, Bruna. So welcome everyone. I can see we're already almost at 200 participants, which is fantastic. So please introduce yourself in the chat. Next slide, please. And whilst you're doing that, I will introduce the team of facilitators we've got here today. So hello, nice to meet you all. My name's Steph Marriott. I'm a midwife advisor here at the ICM. You can see on camera Anna Afuglas, our chief executive, who will introduce herself shortly. Geeta Nimala Sari, a regulator from Indonesia, and her colleague Bintam Petrolina, also a midwife regulator from Indonesia, and then Nahid Dokarami, who will join us shortly, a regulator from the ICM's Regional Professional Committee in East Mediterranean. Next slide, please. So I'm now going to hand over to Anna Afuglas, the Chief Executive of ICM, for some opening remarks for this webinar. Over to you, Anna.
Thank you, Steph. And warm welcome. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. It's amazing to see so many from you from all over the world attending. This is really an inspiring chat that is growing. And please also add in what you hope to get from this hour together with us on midwifery regulation. This is such an important topic to all of us midwives and everyone else. When we think about regulation in midwifery, I often draw a parallel to aviation. Every day, millions of people board planes with complete trust, not because flying is without risk, but because aviation is built on rigorous, internationally recognized standards. Every pilot is trained and licensed, every aircraft inspected, and every route guided by a system that ensures safety, accountability, and trust across borders. Now, women, midwives, and midwifery deserves the same assurance. Around the world, midwives accompany women and families across one's life's most delicate journeys, to birth, to parenthood. Regulation is our profession's air traffic control. It guides, safeguards, and ensures that every mother and baby reaches their destination safely. Without regulation, we risk turbulence, uncertainty, fragmentation, and avoidable harm. But with strong regulatory frameworks, we enable midwives to practice to their full competence, supported by a system that inspires confidence among women, communities, and governments alike. As we begin today's webinar and conversation, let us remember, just as no flight would ever take off without regulation, no health system should take off without a regulated midwife leading the way. We are going to hear some really good news from ICM on our updated global standards for midwifery regulation and the launch of the companion guide. We will also hear from Indonesia and our regional professional committees from the Eastern Mediterranean, and so much more. All of us really welcome your comments and your questions, and we are more than happy to answer them. And from the bottom of our hearts, thank you so much for joining us today. Welcome to this webinar on midwifery regulation. Back to you, Steph.
Thank you, Anna. And I really like the comparison to aviation. It's really important that everyone has safety. So just to cover here what Anna was saying, but so you can see it for yourselves. So we're going to provide you today with an update on the ICM's global standards for midwifery regulation. We're also publishing today their companion guide, so we'll talk you through how you can use that. We're then going to hear from Gita and Bintang, the team in Indonesia, about how they're already implementing the global standards for midwifery regulation, and hear how the voices of regulators are heard at ICM in our regional professional committees. And we then have time at the end to take questions from yourselves. So please, as was explained at the beginning, the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen to put your questions there to all of the speakers that are here. So next slide, please. So many of you will be familiar with the ICM's professional framework for midwifery, which is a guiding tool for ICM. So our members and our partners use it in our approach to strengthening the profession. And as the diagram illustrates, all elements of the framework are interconnected. So when we strengthen one element, we strengthen all the elements. But if we destabilize one, we destabilize all of the elements. So today we're going to focus on the regulation element of the framework. Next slide, please. And again, perfect. So, the primary function of regulation is to protect the public by ensuring that only qualified and competent midwives are registered to practice. But it also raises the status of midwives. It supports them to work autonomously within their full scope of practice, and that in turn improves the quality of care received by the public. So when we have standards for education, registration, professional conduct, we end up with a framework that strengthens the profession and it raises the standard of midwifery practice, which builds the trust of the public in the profession. Next slide, please. So, about the global standards for midwifery regulation. So, the ICM actually first published the global standards for midwifery regulation in 2011, and they were published at the same time as the global standards for midwifery education and a revision of the ICM essential competencies for midwifery practice. And they were created in response to requests from midwives, midwifery associations, governments, and UN partners and other stakeholders, with a goal that we could standardise midwifery regulatory mechanisms across the world, and by doing that, protect the public with safe and competent midwives. So today, together with other ICM standards, the standards can be used by midwifery associations, but also regulators, educators, and governments to develop or strengthen their midwifery regulatory frameworks, which we're going to hear about an example of this later, and raise the standard of midwifery practice in their jurisdiction. A jurisdiction is usually a country, but not always. So as the slide shows, the standards are divided into 4 categories. So the first category is models of regulation. So this states that regulation should be midwifery specific and national. We then look at protection of titles. So this states that only those authorised by legislation can use the title midwife. And we then look at governance. So this states who the members of the Midwifery Regulatory Authority can be, how that regulatory authority is funded, and how it carries out its function. And function is the 4th and largest aspect of the regulation standards. So these categories outline, or this category rather outlines the mechanisms by which a regulatory authority can regulate midwives. So next slide, please. So these are the 6 functions of a regulatory authority. So first we have the scope of practice. So this means that the regulatory authority defines the scope of practice, what a midwife can do in that jurisdiction. And the ICM standards advocate that this is consistent with the ICM's international definition and scope of practice of the midwife. The second function of a regulator is the pre-service midwifery education arm. So the regulatory authority should be setting the minimum standards for pre-service midwifery education. So that includes accreditation, approval and auditing of midwifery education programs and the institutions and faculty that provide those programs. And these standards should be consistent with the ICM Global Standards for Midwifery Education and our newly published Global Standards for Midwife Faculty Development, which there will be another webinar later this year to launch those. The third function is the registration aspect of a regulator. So the regulatory authority sets the criteria for midwifery registration. And that would include when pre-service midwifery education occurred in a different country to where a midwife is seeking registration. And also the role of a regulator is to maintain a live register of midwives, so we know who all the midwives are who are safe and competent to practice within a country. And then the 4th function is continuing competence. So the regulatory authority should have a mechanism by which midwives demonstrate continuing competence, so a continuing ability to fulfill the scope of practice defined, and that they can re-register regularly, so they can remain on that live register, or return to practice if they've been out of practice for a defined period. Then the next function is that of complaints and discipline. And so this is that a regulatory authority should have the authority, so the legislation to support and the processes to investigate complaints related to the competence, conduct or health of a midwife, and they would impose, review or remove penalties or conditions on the practice of that midwife. These processes must be transparent and afford natural justice to all parties. So this means that should a complaint be raised to a regulator, there must be a process by which that midwife is investigated and can respond. And then the final aspect of the regulation standards is a code of conduct. So regulatory authorities should set the standards of conduct, and so this is often referred to as a code of conduct, which is based upon a code of ethics. So these are the behaviours that we expect of a midwife in clinical practice. Next slide, please. So as mentioned, the standards were first published in 2011. And earlier this year in the ICM's council meeting, we updated the standards. And they were reviewed and updated by a group of midwifery regulatory experts in 2024, which led to this approval by Council in 2025. Now, there are minor changes throughout, changes in wording or word order, but I want to highlight what the major changes are in these standards. So throughout, the term regulatory authority in this version replaces what was before called midwifery regulatory authority. And this is because we acknowledge that in many countries, midwives are regulated alongside other professions, and we need these standards to be applicable everywhere. So that also in light of this, we've added an additional standard, 3.5, which states that where midwives are regulated alongside other professions, a separate body or committee should be established that is responsible for midwifery standards and guidance. And we've also added standard 3.9 about collaboration with ministries of health, as it's the key to success of midwifery regulation is that we work in partnership with ministries of health, but also acknowledging that in some countries regulation is undertaken in part through a ministry of health. And finally, under the function of pre-service midwifery education, we've added a standard that states that midwife teachers and midwifery clinical preceptors must complete a programme of study in teaching. And this aligns these standards with the available but new global standards for midwifery faculty development. So we've got consistency across all of these standards. Next slide, please. So now I've gone through with you what the standards are, I want to introduce to you the companion guide that's been published on the website today. So next slide, please. So I want to start with what is a companion guide. So the ICM already has a companion guide for our global standards of midwifery education, but published today is the first ever companion guide for the global standards for regulation. So a companion guide is used alongside the standards, and they provide guidance on how to apply the standards and suggestions on how to evidence that a standard is being met. Next slide, please. So here on this QR code and the link about to be shared in the chat is the newly available access to this document. It's currently available in English and imminently, I hope by the end of next week, will also be available in French and Spanish. And the companion guide is divided into two sections. So section 1 outlines what is effective midwifery regulation, and then section 2 provides additional guidance on each standard. So as I described before, that it suggests how a regulatory authority can implement that a standard is being met, or guide amendments so that a standard is met if it isn't already being met. So next slide, please. So I've provided here a couple of examples from the newly published companion guide. So you'll see on the left, standard 3.2. So this is providing guidance on why midwives should be proportionately represented in a regulatory authority. So we're ensuring that midwives and midwifery practice is appropriately regulated. And then in standard 3.5, the new standard that I mentioned, we're providing guidance outlining why a midwifery specific committee should exist when a regulator is not midwifery specific, and how you could provide evidence to demonstrate that you're meeting that standard. Now, this companion guide is global. So the evidence recommended may be phrased slightly differently to the language you might use in your jurisdiction, where you are a regulator or work as a midwife. But what we need to acknowledge is that effective regulatory principles are the same globally, just that the language and the means, the legislation that implements them is unique to each country. Next slide, please. So ICM also has other regulation resources. So shared in the chat, you'll find that there's a link to the ICM website's resource page just about regulation. So you will see that the new companion guide and the updated standards are there, but it will also show that we have two position statements, one on the legislation needed in a country to regulate midwifery practice, and one on how we can collaborate with women in the regulation of midwifery practice. There's also a regulation toolkit, which we're currently reviewing and updating, and I anticipate that we'll have that with you by next year. But we've kept the toolkit there for now because this is exploring how you can advocate for midwifery regulation in your context, because you may be from a setting where midwifery is not currently being regulated. So I'm now going to hand over to Geeta and Bintang, who are going to tell us how they are implementing the global standards for midwifery regulation. So over to you, Geeta and Bintang.
Okay, thank you, Steph. My slide, please. Hello, everyone. Esteemed colleagues and member of the International Confederation of Midwives. It is a pleasure to join you today to share how Indonesia has adopted and implemented the ICM Global Standard for Midwifery Regulation through our national system. Slide, please. Under this new health law, the Indonesia Health Council, or KKI, has been entrusted with a broader mandate to enhance professional competence and uphold disciplinary standards for all health practitioners. The system consists of three interrelated bodies, that is Indonesia Health Council, an independent authority ensuring quality, professionalism, and ethics across all medical and health professions. Indonesian College of Health, focusing on education quality and professional competence, and Professional Disciplinary Board, responsible for enforcing ethical and disciplinary standards. Together, they form an integrated framework that guarantees safe, ethical, and accountable professional practice, including for midwives. Next slide, please. The new health law number 17 of 2023, together with government regulation number 28 of 2024, give the Council authority to standardize professional practice, improve competence, and regulate the registration of medical and health workers. This legal framework ensures that every health professional, including midwives, follow clear national standards from education to lifelong practice. And the authority of the Indonesian Health Council is to issue, deactivate, and revoke ST. Slide, please. Next slide. ICM Global Standard 4.3 emphasized that each country's legislation should clearly define criteria and process for midwifery registration and licensure. Indonesia regulatory system reflect this principle through clear legal definition and a transparent process managed by the Health Council. Allow me to describe how certification, registration, and licensing are implemented as part of this quality assurance cycle. Next slide. In Indonesia, certification is conducted at the end of education in collaboration with professional college. Registration, now as STR, is mandatory for all practicing midwives. It is granted by the council and valid for life under the new regulation. Licensing, or SIP, is issued by local governments for 5 years based on proof ongoing competence and CPD achievements. This three-step process ensures that all midwives maintain professional standard and public trust throughout their careers. The next slide will be continued by Ms. Gita.
Okay, thank you so much, Bintang. So, hello everyone, I'm Gita, Indonesian College of Midwifery, and I am the member of the RPC, Regional Professional Committee, ICM for Regulator Committee. So I will continue the presentation from Bintang, and this part I will explain the role of the Indonesian Health Council, which is supported by the Midwifery Collegium as a task force consisting of midwifery experts. And in terms of midwifery regulation aligned with the ICM global standard, Indonesia has adopted all categories of this standard. And now I will focus on the examples of the implementation under Category 1 and Category 2. Next slide, please. Okay. This slide shows the recognition under the Indonesian Health Law number 17 of 2023, which officially acknowledge midwife as a professional health practitioners in Indonesia, a distinct and independent profession among other health workers. Next slide, please. Okay. So in this slide, you can see the Indonesia has adopted the ICM definition of the midwife, including who a midwife is, her roles and aspects related to the education, regulation, registration, certification, licensing, and scope of practice. However, Indonesia has a specific characteristic you can see here. Only women can become a midwife. This is based on a national study involving the Indonesian public and relevant stakeholders in Indonesia, which concluded that Indonesia prefers its midwives to be a woman. So in the left side, this is the ICM definition, and the right side is the Indonesian definition of the midwife. Slide, please. And in this slide, tell about in Indonesia, the midwifery qualification framework aligned with the ICM competencies. So in Indonesia, we have a level 7, midwife at a level 7 have achieved the full ICM scope of practice through the 5 years program, which is a bachelor or a bachelor applied science, and followed by 1 year of the professional education. So the Indonesian midwifery system integrated a national qualification with the International Confederation of Midwife Global Standard to ensure the competent, accountable, and professional midwifery practice. Slide, please. And this is another category that we already adopted in Indonesia. For the category 4 scope of practice, specific for Indonesian midwifery scope of practice. Slide, please. Yeah, you can see here, this is still the draft from us. Yeah, The Indonesia has adopted the ICM global standard for midwifery regulation, and we adapted them to the national policies and women health needs. And the scope of midwifery practice covers care from the antenatal to postnatal period, including newborn, infant, child health, as well as women's sexual and reproductive health. And the standard emphasize the promotive and preventive care and ensure the Indonesian midwife are globally competent, nationally relevant, and professional accountable. So you can see here in the left side, this is our draft of the competency standard. And the right side, the circle one, is the ICM Essential Competencies Framework from 2024. They're already launching from the ICM. And this is still the draft from our new competency standard. And we hope our Minister of the Health will sign this document this year. Slide, please. Yeah, this is the conclusion from our presentation. So the Indonesian Health Council, we call that in Indonesia KKI, Council Kesehatan Indonesia, demonstrated a consistent commitment to safeguarding the standard of the quality and competence among medical and health professionals as a part of its broader mission to promote provision of safe, high quality, and accountability health services for the public. Okay, next slide. Thank you very much for the attention, and thank you very much for this great opportunity for me and Bintang. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Bintang and Geeta. Fantastic. And I am very excited, as you both already know, about the fact that you will hopefully, approval pending, have a scope of practice and therefore a pre-service midwifery curriculum that aligns with the ICM's scope of practice, definition of a midwife, and essential competencies, which we are very excited about. So thank you. And thank you also for talking us through there how you are applying the global standards for midwifery regulation in Indonesia. Indonesia has made really incredible progress in midwifery in the last few years, and it's great to hear about it. So I'm now going to talk to you very briefly about the regional professional committees before I hand over to another, as Geeta is also a regulator on one of our RPCs. But before I hand over, I just want to explain a little bit about the regional professional committees. So next slide, please. So in ICM, we have 6 global regions, these mapped to the WHO regions. And each region has a regional professional committee. So this is a group of 9 midwives, 2 educators, 2 regulators, 2 researchers, 2 practicing midwives, and 1 emerging midwife leader for each of the 6 regions. And the RPCs build working relationships and networks within their own group. They also work with each other as RPCs and also with the midwifery associations in the region. And their aim is to strengthen ICM's knowledge of their region, particularly on education, regulation, research and practice in the region. But they also provide a huge amount of knowledge and expertise to ICM on for example, reviewing the global standards for midwifery regulation, contributing to events like this, and also providing ICM with an awareness of what challenges might be going on in their region. So I'd then like to hand over to Nahid Kodakarami, who is the midwifery regulator, or one of the midwifery regulators in the Eastern Mediterranean RPC, to talk a little bit about what they've been doing there. So I'll next slide and hand over to Nahid. Can you unmute for us, Nahid? Nahid, you are muted. We cannot hear you. Are you able to unmute for us?
Oh, yeah, sorry. Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for being here today with all of you who care so deeply about our profession. I will share practical steps for the strengthened midwifery regulation in EMRO countries. As the regulatory body for midwifery varies across our region, it is essential to review how each country can align its system with the ICM global standards. For example, in Iran, the Medical Council regulates midwifery practice while the Ministry of Health oversees education and accreditation. Other countries in the region show similar diversities, such as the UAE and Pakistan Nursing and Midwifery Council, and syndicate-based system in Iraq and Tunisia. In Afghanistan, regulation remains fragile due to current restriction on women's education. This variation underscores the importance of collaboration among our association. As you can see in this table, we have some current challenges, and we suppose some action for resolving these challenges. For example, inconsistent legal recognition of midwives, variable education and accreditation standards, weak or fragmented regulatory bodies, and limited for relicensing system, and fragile setting refugees workforce shortage in some place. We don't have enough position for new educated midwife, and the action that we suppose is a certain legal framework, define a scope of practice and protect the title of midwife, align education and accreditation, adapt ICM standards, and build strong regulatory authorities, empower councils, and also implement CPD and relicensing for ensuring continuous competence. Foster regional collaboration, shared tool, and peer learning. Next slide. For the for practical steps and quick wins, we suppose to plan, one short term and one medium term. At the short term, we mapping national regulatory statutes among EMRO, hold regional workshop to adapt ICM tools, pilot accreditation of one midwifery program, and in the medium term, we are going to introduce registration and title protection, develop online registry and CPD framework, and then evaluate progress with indicators. It is essential to review how each country can align its system with the ICM global standards. Next slide, please. And for the future plan, we should advocate for a regional regulatory roadmap and partner with ministries, UN regional and national offices, especially with the UNFP and WHO, and also the ICM. Then organize a regional workshop and national assessment. We could establish a regional collaboration platform, implement exchange and mentorship with other regions. This could include short technical exchanges, joint webinars, or study visits, virtual or in person. Next slide. Together, we can strengthen regulation to protect women, newborn, and midwives. Thank you very much again. And if there is any question, I will be here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nahid. Great to hear all the work that's going on in the Eastern Mediterranean RPC. And I think if we'd had a regulator from each of the RPCs, they would have been able to really tell us some similar challenges and also different challenges for different regions. So I'd now like to reintroduce, welcome back all the facilitators that we've had today. Thank you everyone for your great contributions. And we're now going to spend a bit of time answering some of the questions that have come in. If anyone watching has questions that have come to mind as we've gone through the updates to the standards, the companion guides, and heard from Indonesia and the Eastern Mediterranean RPC, please do ask them using the Q&A button on the panel at the bottom. Now, I have had a similar question asked multiple times in different ways that I'd like to ask to Geeta. So
Yes.
Geeta, the question that's come in is, why are only women able to be midwives in Indonesia? And is that the case for obstetricians as well? So over to you.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you so much, Steph. And thank you so much for the question. Yeah, this is interesting for all of the midwife here, because in Indonesia we adopted the midwife is only a woman. It's different with the obstetrician. The obstetrician can be men and women, but in Indonesia, a definition of midwife is specifically limited to the woman. This decision reflects our cultural, religious, and social context of Indonesia society, where midwifery is a traditional and normatively recognized as a woman-to-woman profession, like that. And the restriction is not based on the gender discrimination, not based of that, but rather on the specific needs, woman needs, belief, and the expectation of the Indonesian woman. Particularly, we know that regarding the reproductive health care, many Indonesian women and the communities express a strong preference to receive intimate and reproductive health services from female providers, and which align with this religious values, cultural sensitivity, and the principle of the respectful maternity care. So the midwife is a woman. This is the important one for midwife for the female in Indonesia. Therefore, the national definition of we need the midwife as a woman is it intended to the honor, the trust, comfort, and dignity of the woman in Indonesia, while we ensuring that midwifery services remain culturally acceptable, respectful, and responsive to the unique needs of the Indonesian woman and family. So we already have this title since 30 years ago, and we just continue and make a strong again the research, the study using the kind of qualitative and using the questionnaire to the all women in Indonesia. And still the decision is the midwife is in Indonesia is still a woman, like that.
Thank you, Geeta. A very comprehensive answer and to a number of questions of the same topic. Thank you. So my next question is for Nahid. It doesn't say who asked the question, but a question about the scope of practice of a midwife in Pakistan is not yet defined. Have you any guidance on how in Pakistan they can begin to define the scope of practice of a midwife?
It's why I suppose that we should, at the first step, we could do a research about the regulatory system in any country in the IMRO. I don't know exactly how work the Nursing Midwifery Council in Pakistan. I think Masarat should explain about that, but I know that they have very difficulty for scope of practice and also the title of midwife, because sometimes a nurse chosen to work as a midwife. It's one the thing that I could found about the midwifery in Pakistan.
Thank you, Nahid. So you raise a really valuable point that we need to
Yeah.
understand the context and the about the regulator in Pakistan. The other thing I would add, as the standards mention, is that we need to look at how we are defining a midwife
Yeah.
and having legislation, so national law that's protecting the title of a midwife. So we
It's
define
very
what a
important.
midwife is and then say by law only the person that meets this definition can call themselves a midwife. And I would encourage the anonymous participant from Pakistan to contact ICM directly if you think we could help with that.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Nahid. So a question for you, Anna. Can ICM support in any way to establish independent midwifery regulatory authorities, or rather they say include midwives in regulatory bodies where they don't currently exist? So I think what Tamim is asking is, if there is no regulation of midwifery in a context, where can we start?
It's a very, very good question, and some countries do find themselves in that situation, and that is why the global standards has been developed from the very first start. So it's really a good idea to, together with the documents and the global standards and ICM, we are more than happy to help you out with that, to advocate for a strong regulation in country. It should be the national government who host the regulatory body, because they are, at the end of the day, responsible for their population. So even independent midwives, private practitioners, public deployed staff should be regulated by one body. Otherwise, it will be scattered into different scopes of practices, and that is not safe for women nor for midwives. So that is really my response to that question, Steph, in the sense that from ICM, we are happy to support, but also really advise you to look into the open source documents that has been shared and launched today. Back to you, Steph.
Lovely. Thank you, Anna. So we now have a question from a midwife in Peru. So I will ask this to the group, see if anyone has an answer. So saying that while it's true that the presented standards allow us to have an understanding of how the profession can move forward, in Peru they're facing a problem with the economic interest of physicians. So they describe them as interfering with the daily practice of midwives. So, and that's preventing a clear definition of the true scope of practice of midwifery practice. So what alternatives could we have in that situation? Or I might frame the question slightly differently, which is that how can we better apply the global standards for midwifery regulation so that we protect the full scope of practice of a midwife? Would anyone like to answer?
Yeah, this is really a growing concern in very many countries, where we see the scope of practice and what midwives are allowed to do is being compromised from different professions and in different areas, may it be private, may it be public. Our advice is to, as a midwifery association, go together with institutions and others who want the same thing and really strongly advocate for this often harmful practice. And one of the big areas is of course the C-section rates, which are enormously and harmfully high in many countries, where midwives must and should play a much bigger role to actually stop that harmful practice, but where regulation is not supporting fully. It is really a growing concern, and this is why regulation is so utterly important, and that's why also it's so good that so many of you are here with us today to make this, to support this narrative much stronger. That's my thinking when I got your question, Steph. I don't know if anyone else wants to comment as well. Over.
Has it been a challenge in Indonesia, Gita or Bintang, the challenge of midwifery scope of practice start feeling like it encroaches on the financial gains of other professions?
Yes, I think this is the same problem in Indonesia, right? Because now, until now, we really need to focus first with our competency standard. Because after that, after we already have the new standard in Indonesia, so we hope we can do the advocation again to the minister according the payment, according the salary, because you know that in Indonesia is still very, very weird the condition according the payment of the midwife. We have the Indonesian midwifery that has the private practice, and we have the kind of the national health insurance, and this is very, very difficult policy according the midwifery independent practice and according the health insurance that every woman need go to the primary health practice to get getting labor, but sometimes the midwife need to help them to the midwifery independent practice, but the payment is very, very small. Yeah. So now we need to focus first in our Indonesian competency standard for midwife. And after that, we have the next step. We need to give the advocation, do the advocation to the minister according this social economic condition for the midwife. Yes, still struggling for this.
Thank you, Gita. And you raised a very important point there, which are not covered in the global standards because they are global standards, which is about the interface between insurance and the regulation of midwives. So generally it would be expected that a midwife has a registration or a license to then be able to have insurance, but ICM does not go into the detail in the standards about that, and that's because it's very specific to each country, as you just beautifully explained. So I'm aware of time. I have a question here that I'm going to ask Anna because she doesn't need to answer now because I know that she's going to answer this question very shortly with something else she's going to say, which is how can ICM support African countries to advocate for more midwife recruitment? The current available midwives cannot provide the standard midwifery care. So I'm going to get Anna to keep that in her mind because I know that she's going to answer it. And can we go back to the slide deck, please? Perfect. So we now would like to hear from you. So here at ICM, we're always keen to provide the resources that you as our members, member associations and colleagues need. So I've demonstrated today some of the resources that we already have. I've also explained that we are reviewing the toolkit, but what helps us is to know from you what resources on midwifery regulation from ICM would be helpful. There should be a pop-up box on your screen now, and you can write your answers in there for ICM, and we will use these to contribute to the development of our resources. So I'll just give you all a minute to type. Okay. Are we able to reveal some of the suggestions? Does it show us what they are? Yes, it's just not showing me.
Can I share my screen so we can see the results?
Great. So we've got some keywords coming up here. Guidance on the scope of practice, maybe some them being represented and assured to be an independent profession. Yeah, how we define regulation. This is a good point. One of the things we're working on is a glossary so that we have a shared understanding of what these resources might be. Clear scope and standards. So you are able on the ICM website to find our definition of a midwife, our scope of practice, and the essential competencies. A toolkit to work through. That was the right answer. Fantastic. So we can stop sharing those because I'm conscious of time, but thank you so much for those. I'm going to spend some time after this webinar looking at the questions asked as well, because I know that many of the questions in the Q&A we didn't get to, but thank you. And I would now like to hand over to Anna, who's going to give some information about a couple of things and close this webinar. Thank you, and over to you, Anna.
Thank you so much, Steph, and thank you, everyone. I think the maximum number of today's webinar came up to 270 plus something, which was absolutely amazing. And what I see in the chat and what I see from the Q&A, that there is a huge need for more discussions and for more clarification and for more work around regulation. I really want to acknowledge two questions that we did not address, one of them being Indigenous midwives and how midwives can work with traditional birth attendants or traditional midwives. And we will get back to you on that. And another question that, or another area of questions that we didn't touch upon either was the deployment of graduated midwives, which is a paradox because many countries, or all countries in the world, I would say, need midwives, yet there are not enough deployment opportunities nor a salary that meets the need. And this is really a segue into the next slide. But before I talk about the next slide, please note the mail to ICM who have more to offer. So if you as a midwifery association or even a government would like to have more resources from us, please reach out and we will be able to help you specifically in your country if you would like to. We often work with governments, with UN agencies and other partners on regulation. So feel free to discuss with us and explore what opportunities there are for your specific country. Now over to the next slide, Steph. And this is really exciting leading up to the ICM Congress next June 2026. Just 1 week ago, we started the petition for 1 million more midwives in the world. And this is really from the State of the World Midwifery Report calculations that is constantly ongoing, where we have defined the need for at least 1 more million midwives. This is to say that the 2 million midwives that we are currently we must take care of of our colleagues and ourselves, and really make sure that we stay in the profession in a good way. Coming back to the question around employment and salaries, etc., we really have to support the midwives and our colleagues that we have today. But we also must get another 1 million midwives to work for women and for communities for the better good of the world. As of right now, we have 7,468 signatures. And in this picture, you will see a QR code. So please use your phone or take a screenshot, and we are also going to share this. You can also visit our ICM website where you will see the petition and you can sign. And we encourage not only you to sign, but also your family and your friends, your colleagues, those who are not directly today affected by a midwife, but can be tomorrow. So it's about the future, and to really engage as many as you can to sign the petition. And we hope to reach 1 million midwives when we meet, hopefully in Lisbon next June at the Congress, to hand over this very strong petition for more midwives in the world. And with this, I really want to thank Steph, Bruna, Elisabetta, and everyone who has been behind the scenes at the ICM headquarters in Netherlands, and to our wonderful guest speakers, Geeta, Nahid, and Bintang, for your contribution today. Really appreciated, and good luck to all of you for your great work and into the future. I saw your future plans for Indonesia, which was really exciting. And thank you, Nahid, for representing the Regional Professional Committee. So with this, I wish you really a continued good day and week, and please stay in touch with us. Thank you so much, and over from ICM.
Thank you,
Thank you,
everyone, and
everyone.
goodbye.
Bye.